Yes, for those of you who don't know me, I am a member of the Twin Cities Buddhist Sangha, and I am also an ordained interfaith minister, which means that I went to a 2-year interfaith seminary, which was attended by people of numerous faiths, and in which we studied all faiths, as well as learned to be ministers. And we attended services of every different faith during that time. And then as an ordained interfaith minister and prior to the pandemic, I conducted wedding ceremonies and funerals and baby blessings for people of various faiths. And I led services at monthly services at some assisted living facilities, and I spoke in various venues. And before that, I worked as a hospital chaplain in California. And it was during my time as a chaplain that I found a home for myself in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And in fact, it was 11 years ago this month that I first stumbled into the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist Church on Octavia Street in San Francisco. And so I tried to go back 11 years on my calendar on my phone to see what the exact date was that I attended. But the calendar on my phone, of course, would not allow me to go back that far. But I remember I walked into the building on a sunny February Sunday, and as I said, I found my home in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And so this month of February is an important anniversary for me, but it's also an important month for many observances in many faiths, including Nihon-e, or Nirvana Day. As Todd said, Nirvana Day marks the death and enlightenment of the historic Buddha who passed away at the age of 80. And for Shin Buddhists, this is a day to show gratitude to the Buddha for his teachings. We know the historical Buddha had already experienced enlightenment many years before his death. His enlightenment came about when he sat under the Bodhi tree and contemplated the human condition. He thought about the nature of suffering, and in a moment of illumination, he understood that we suffer because we resist the natural way of life, which is ever changing. We do not have peace because we hold on to the idea of permanence in an impermanent world. We try to keep a strong grip on people and things and situations and conditions as if they are fixed and everlasting. And this was the moment of enlightenment for the Buddha. But it is on Nirvana Day that we honor the day his human body ended his time on earth. And it is said that just before he passed, as he lay on the soft earth between two sala or fruit trees, he spoke his final words, which vary according to translation, but no matter the rendition, they summarize the enlightenment he received while sitting on the Buddha tree so many years before. As he lay dying, he said, "All things in this world are impermanent." Or another translation of his final words say the same thing. He said, "Recognize the true nature of the living world and do not be anxious." I'm sure that even though the Buddha asked his followers not to be anxious, even though he reminded them that impermanence is the true nature of the world, I imagine they did feel anxious when he died, and probably a variety of other emotions, sorrow and sadness and pain at the loss of their teacher, and fear about the future, perhaps uncertainty because they're human. These are feelings we all experience when change occurs. And so the story of the death of the Buddha and his last reminder of impermanence is as real and relevant today as it was so many, many centuries ago. Accepting the idea of impermanence is something we still struggle with. So I had said that I had looked back on my calendar to see if I could find the exact date in February that I had attended the Buddhist church in San Francisco for the first time, but I couldn't find it. But that little activity got me started looking backwards in time. And backwards actually could only take me 1 year ago because that's as far as my phone calendar allows. But looking backward 1 year was quite a reminder of impermanence, because 1 year ago today, things were very different. For me, 1 year ago today, I was in Florida, where I go every winter, although because of the pandemic, I did not go this year, and that was a big change. And according to the calendar on that day, I went to a yoga class in the morning, and then I went out to dinner with 3 of my neighbors later that day. When I read my calendar entries for February 21, 2020, I remember the day very well. I remember how I got up in the morning and I dressed in my yoga clothing, and then I joined a group of people tightly packed together in a closed classroom to practice yoga. And then I reflected on the evening. 4 of us from 3 different households rode together in one car with windows closed. We walked into the restaurant as if it was the most natural thing in the world, as if it was something we would always do. And then when we ended the evening, we all talked about how much fun we had and how we really looked forward to doing it again. And because I was planning on returning to Minnesota very soon, the idea was we would all do it again when we see each other next year, because we've been doing that winter after winter. But so much has happened since that day only 1 year ago. The world has changed, and we are all changed from where we were only a year ago. And it has been a whirlwind, or maybe I should say it's been a blizzard. Do you ever watch a movie on television nowadays and you see people all crowded together and you immediately feel a little bit nervous about it? Or look on the screen and see characters attending a dance or going to the theater or even visiting each other in homes where they're not even related and they're not even wearing masks? Our reactions show how we have shifted and changed externally and internally during this time. Because very soon after that day in February, as we all know, the pandemic arrived, and businesses, schools, cities, countries shut down. And then some things somewhat and cautiously opened up again, and then they shut down again, and it's been a roller coaster. A vaccine has been developed, and it is uncertain how soon we will all be able to get it. And we all wonder how life will be once we have reached herd immunity. Last year, or actually a little less than a year ago, we were all in shock and scrambling to figure out how to be safe. And now this year, the talk is about COVID fatigue because of the way we are keeping safe. And with the arrival of COVID came violence against Asian Americans. And the killing of George Floyd further unmasked racial injustice and inequity. We've had a stressful election season, followed by the insurrection at the Capitol, and the impeachment trial recently concluded. An earthquake rocked parts of Japan. Myanmar has undergone a coup, and weather has become extreme, from intense heat last summer to snowstorms and bitter cold throughout 30 states this past week, including Texas and Mississippi. And through it all, we've been adjusting or trying to adjust, often being very creative about how we adapt by Zooming with family and friends while staying safe in our own homes. And companies have changed how they do business. Many employees now work from home. Stores and restaurants deliver to our homes, and artists have brought their work outside, creating outdoor ice sculptures and drive-through art exhibits. Concerts and ballet and opera are brought into our home via Zoom. One-person theater performances appear in empty storefronts in Miami, and in New Orleans, people decorated the outside of their homes for Mardi Gras because the annual parade was canceled. And here in Minnesota, when the temperatures began to drop, we bought snowshoes and sleds, and we even bundled up and packed winter picnics. I went out for a walk one day and I noticed a couple of people were packing the snow in their front yard into the shape of a table and benches along the side for Friday night wine get-togethers outside. A lot of creativity, and there is so much beauty showing up during these times. In my own life, it has become very simple and quiet. And because of that, I noticed the other day how the sun shone through my window and then through the chandelier so that the entire wall was sparkling with rainbows. And I just sat there and I looked at it. It was a little gift that filled me with joy. And on Valentine's Day last Sunday, I FaceTimed with two friends of mine who live in California. We all wore red shirts for the event and we toasted one another with champagne. And after we ended our call, I was filled with such joy and such gratitude for them and for the time we spent together. Of course, I'm grateful for friends and loved ones and have been in the past, but more than ever, I am aware of the fleetingness of these moments, and so I treasure them even more. I see people helping one another, noticing the needs of another. My neighbor and I both live alone, and so we've created a little code in the way we open our curtains each morning to let each other know we're alive and well. We're looking out for each other. And neighborhoods have started up buy nothing groups where people give what they don't need to one another. There's a lot of speculation with all the forced togetherness brought on by COVID that divorce would go up this year. But I read an article that said that the opposite has occurred, that the majority of people and spouses have grown closer to one another. And people are forming book clubs to learn more about systemic racism, and city councils are looking at racism within their ranks. There are published lists of businesses owned by people of color so they can receive support from the public. Eyes are being opened to inequality and the cruelty of racism, and people's hearts are opening as together we make our way through all that is and has been happening. This has definitely been a year of incredible change, unlike anything we've ever been through before in our lifetimes. The world is not the same, and we are not the same. And although this blizzard of changes of the last year have been numerous and overwhelming, we do know that change has always been happening. In Buddhism, we are reminded that change is a constant, and we cannot cling to what once was, which drives home the final words of the Buddha: all things in this world are impermanent. Recognize the true nature of the living world and not be anxious. But to not be anxious is not always easy because there has been so very much sorrow and immense loss and such uncertainty. A lot of us have lost people to COVID. We've lost jobs. We are missing human interaction and connection. We're missing the way we once moved around in the world. And it can feel so hard to bear it all. And so even though as Buddhists, we understand impermanence, even though we know there is peace in letting go of our grasping, it seems as if we have had to do so much pivoting this year, and that sadness and grief and worry and uncertainty and maybe even fatigue overshadows that knowing and the peace it can bring. And so be gentle with yourself and one another because we are human. I'd like to share a poem written by Rumi, a 13th century Persian poet and Sufi mystic. It's called The Guest House. It goes, "This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." The Dharmakara understood what it is to be a guest house. He understood our humanness with such compassion that he was moved to make the primal vow to save all sentient beings, and thus became the Amida Buddha. When we as Shin Buddhists realize, truly realize, or maybe I should say internalize, the deep and profound compassion of the Amida Buddha and the enormity of the primal vow, when we trust in it and open our hearts to such compassion, our own ability to be grateful in all ways wells up and our own Buddha nature unfolds. We can be open to seeing the Buddha nature in all things, seeing it in this pared down life we are now living because of COVID, in our simple lives at home, in the snow and the cold, in all the changes. Many of you may know of Kobayashi Isa. He's one of my favorite haiku poets. He was a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist who lived from 1763 to 1828. And his life was not easy. He lost his mother when he was 2 years old. He had 4 children and each one died young. His beloved wife died shortly after the birth of his last child, and he even lost his house to a fire. In his poetry, he conveys what it is to be human and have human experiences. He understands the fleetingness of every moment, and he also revels in each moment. He writes, "Here, I'm here, the snow falling." I think when we view the world through the lens of the primal vow, it might be as simple as that we are here and it's snowing, that we are here and the sun is shining. We are here and. With everything that's been happening in Texas with the snow and the cold, I'm reminded of my memories of growing up in Minnesota, of the blizzards and the ice storms and cold and the snow that would shut down our city, of how the snow would be falling soft and velvety, and it would all seem very magical. All seemed well. And then the temperatures would drop and the winds would begin to blow intense and bitter, and everything would change. I grew up hearing my mother and my aunts and my uncles tell their stories many times about the blizzard that came on Armistice Day, November 11, 1940. The headlines in the paper read, "Perfect day for a parade." And indeed, it started out exactly that way. It was unusually warm. Light sweaters, skirts, bobby socks, or a suit jacket were the attire. There was no need for an overcoat. Many had their windows open and they were basking in a day that was almost balmy. But by early afternoon, the weather began to deteriorate, and it did so rapidly. And by the time the blizzard had ended, 49 people had died. Some who tried to walk only 1 or 2 blocks home when their cars had become stuck and buried. These people had become disoriented and exhausted in the blinding snow and the raging winds, and they had simply laid down to die. And others were struck by frostbite within minutes, losing fingers and toes. Power lines were down, farmers lost their livelihoods, turkey, sheep, cattle died, and people were trapped in their homes and their offices with no heat for days. I read a story about a woman who was all alone in her home with no heat during that Armistice Day blizzard. She was afraid and so cold, trying to simply survive until the brutal storm was over. And when after several days the winds had finally died down and the snow had ceased to fly, she crept outside her home to find her whole world hidden in white, snow piled 8 feet high, and sorrow everywhere. But on the side of the house, she discovered the wind had blown the snow so that it had formed a little burrow. It had formed a protective tunnel. And within that tunnel, a patch of nasturtiums had been completely sheltered and undisturbed all during those many days of violent winds and freezing cold and blinding snow. Nasturtiums were blooming in the snow. I think we have these little tunnels of life from which to build, in which we can rest and find peace. We are here, and change, big or small, doesn't have to feel like a blizzard. In the midst of all this uncertainty, when we embrace the truth of impermanence, and when we trust in the compassion of the Amida Buddha, no matter the circumstances, we can live in peace and contentment. Sometimes we have to look for them, but nasturtiums do bloom in the middle of the storm. And for that, we can be grateful. Namo.